Failure didn't just knock on Rohan's door. It lived there. It sat with him at breakfast, followed him to school, and whispered the same sentence over and over again. This is as far as you'll ever go. The night he almost quit, rain poured through the broken roof of their house, dripping onto the floor. Rohan sat on the edge of his bed, holding a rejection letter, one more added to a growing pile. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at the words until they blurred. Failure was winning, and the scariest part wasn't that he was failing. It was that quitting finally felt reasonable. Rohan grew up in a crowded settlement on the edge of a city that never noticed him. Skyscrapers shimmered in the distance, symbols of success he could see but never touch. The roads near his home were cracked and uneven. Power cuts were normal, dreams were not. His father worked construction jobs, leaving before sunrise and returning after dark with exhaustion carved into his face. His mother cleaned houses, her hands rough from years of scrubbing floors that weren't hers. There was no safety net in Rohan's world. If you fell, you stayed down. School was meant to be his escape, but reality followed him. His uniform was faded. His shoes were worn thin. Teachers rarely called his name unless he made a mistake. Others spoke of careers, colleges, futures. Rohan listened quietly, wondering if those words were meant for people like him. Failure showed up early in Rohan's life and stayed. He struggled academically, not because he lacked intelligence, but because hunger makes it hard to concentrate. Nights were spent helping his parents, mornings arrived too soon. When he failed an exam for the first time, he told himself it was temporary. When he failed again, doubt crept in. By the third failure, doubt felt permanent. Friends moved ahead. Some dropped out. Some succeeded. Rohan stayed behind, watching doors close one by one. People stopped encouraging him. You should learn a trade, they said. Dreams don't fill empty stomachs. Each sentence chipped away at him. Still, he tried. And still, he failed. The hardest battles aren't the loud ones. They're the silent ones. Watching others succeed while pretending you're okay. Smiling while wondering what's wrong with you. Asking yourself why effort never seems to be enough. Late at night, Rohan questioned everything. Am I just not meant for more? Is persistence pointless if talent is missing? How many times can someone fail before it means something? Failure didn't just block his path. It challenged his very identity. The rejection letter came after months of effort, applications, interviews, hope carefully built and quietly destroyed. Rohan folded the paper slowly. That night, he didn't plan for tomorrow. He planned to surrender, not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly letting go. Because quitting doesn't always look like defeat. Sometimes it looks like relief. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom, it's solid ground. From there, the only way to look is up. That night, something shifted. The steady drip of rain on the floor started to sound less like failure and more like a rhythm. A heartbeat. Rohan looked at the pile of rejections. Each one was a lesson. Each one was a step. They weren't tombstones. They were milestones. The world had told him no 100 times, but it only takes one yes to change everything. And that yes had to come from him first. He realized that success isn't about never falling. It's about how many times you get back up, even when no one is watching. He picked up a pen, not to write a letter of surrender, but to start a new application. The skyscrapers in the distance didn't seem so far away anymore. They weren't just something to see. They were something to reach for. His story wasn't over. He was just getting started. Maybe you feel like Rohan right now. Maybe failure feels like it lives in your house too. Rohan didn't quit that night, but he didn't sleep either. He lay awake listening to the rain hit the tin roof, every drop sounding like another reminder of what he hadn't achieved. His mind replayed every failure like a cruel movie on repeat: failed exams, rejected applications, disappointed faces. For the first time, he asked a dangerous question. What if the problem isn't my effort, but my direction? The next morning, Rohan skipped school and wandered through the city. He walked past crowded markets, tall buildings, people rushing toward lives that seemed important. Everyone looked like they knew where they were going. He didn't. Eventually, he found himself inside a small public library, one of the few quiet places left in the city. He hadn't planned it. He just needed silence. Inside, he picked up a book at random, then another, then another. And slowly, something began to shift. These weren't stories of overnight success. They were stories of people who failed more times than they succeeded, people who were rejected, ignored, underestimated. One sentence hit him hard. Failure doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you're unfinished. Rohan read that line again and again. For the first time, failure felt less like a verdict and more like a message. As days passed, Rohan returned to the library regularly. He learned about habits, skill building, discipline, and focus. Not motivation, discipline. He realized something uncomfortable. He had been working hard but not deliberately. He was chasing outcomes instead of improving his ability. He was seeking approval instead of growth. Failure wasn't laughing at him. It was pointing something out, and once he saw that, he couldn't unsee it. The turning point didn't arrive as a burst of inspiration. It arrived as acceptance. Rohan accepted that no one was coming to rescue him. No mentor, no miracle, no shortcut. If his life was going to change, it would be because he changed first. He stopped talking about his dreams and started designing his routines. He woke up earlier. He studied specific skills. He practiced daily, even when it was boring, even when it hurt his pride. He failed again, of course he did. But this time, he failed forward. Each mistake became data. Each rejection became a lesson. Each weakness became a target for improvement. The progress was slow, so slow it was almost invisible day to day, but it was undeniable over time. Months passed. People still doubted him, but Rohan no longer argued with them. He was too busy building. One evening, while reviewing his progress, Rohan noticed something surprising. He wasn't afraid of failure anymore. Failure had lost its power because it no longer meant the end. It meant feedback. And that realization right there changed everything. That was the real turning point. Not achieving success, but gaining perspective. Rohan learned truths that most people discover far too late in life. He learned that failure is not the opposite of success. Quitting is. He learned that talent is helpful, but discipline is unstoppable. He learned that motivation fades, but habits remain. Life doesn't reward effort just once. It rewards consistency over time. He realized that failure almost won, not because he was weak, but because he believed it defined him. Once he stopped believing that lie, failure lost its grip. It wasn't an enemy. It was training. It was the resistance that made him stronger. It was the guide that showed him the way. And in the end, it was the very thing that taught him how to truly succeed. Change didn't just storm into Rohan's life. It crept in quietly, almost unnoticed. Weeks slowly melted into months, and months stretched into years. The routine he once had to force himself to follow started to feel natural. The chaos that once defined his days was replaced by a quiet discipline. The constant confusion gave way to a sharp focus. With this new clarity, Rohan's skills began to sharpen. His way of thinking matured, and his confidence, which was once as fragile as glass, became grounded. It wasn't a loud, boastful confidence, but a solid, unshakable belief in himself. Opportunities didn't suddenly fall from the sky. There was no single moment of breakthrough. But when small doors of opportunity did creak open, for the first time, he was ready to walk through them. He started by clearing an exam he had once failed not once, but twice. Then he passed another, and then came something even bigger. For the first time in his life, progress wasn't accidental. It wasn't luck. It was earned. The people who once looked right through him started to notice. Some offered genuine encouragement, happy to see him succeed. Others, of course, pretended they had believed in him all along. Rohan didn't bother correcting them. He didn't need their validation anymore. He realized the real victory wasn't the success itself, it was the self-respect he had finally found. One evening, Rohan found himself back in his old neighborhood. He walked down the same cracked roads, under the same dim streetlights. He saw the same quiet struggle reflected in people's eyes. But this time, something profound inside him had changed. He no longer felt ashamed of where he came from. Instead, a deep sense of pride washed over him. He saw his parents, they were older now, a bit slower, but their smiles came more easily. For the very first time, Rohan wasn't just surviving. He was able to contribute, to give back. Failure had taken so many things from him over the years. But in its place, it had given him something incredibly rare, a strength that didn't depend on his circumstances. A strength that was entirely his own. So if you're listening to this right now, standing at what feels like your lowest point, I need you to listen very carefully. Failure has not defeated you. It's simply asking you one question. How badly do you want to continue? You don't need some extraordinary talent to keep going. You don't need a stroke of luck to try again. And you absolutely do not need anyone else's approval to believe in yourself. What you need is consistency, especially on the days when motivation has completely disappeared. You need courage when doubt starts screaming in your ear. And you need patience when your progress feels so slow that it seems invisible. Failure almost won. It almost took everything from Rohan. But it didn't, because he refused to quit. And so can you. Keep fighting. Years later, Rohan learned something most people never expect. Success brings new pressure. With every step of growth came more responsibility, higher expectations, an annoying fear of losing everything he had fought so hard to build. There were nights when that old doubt crept back in, not as a roaring monster like before, but as a quiet, dangerous whisper. What if I fall again? What if this was all just a fluke? Then, life decided to test him again. A major opportunity, one he had bet heavily on, completely collapsed. A project he was leading failed, and it failed publicly. People started to question his ability. Some of his closest allies walked away. The old Rohan, the one who had hit rock bottom before, would have panicked. He would have spiraled, but the new Rohan? He simply paused, and then he began to rebuild. Because the struggle had trained him for moments exactly like this. Failure no longer shocked him. It was a familiar signal. It reminded him of where he had been and what he had overcome. So Rohan didn't quit. He reset. He took a hard, honest look at his mistakes, adjusted his strategy, and improved his systems. He strengthened his discipline. He started moving forward again, slower this time, smarter, and with a sense of calm that only comes from experience. And that's when he realized something incredibly powerful. The goal was never to avoid failure. The real goal was to outgrow it, and he finally had. As Rohan stabilized his life and his business once more, he began to quietly mentor others, young, ambitious people who reminded him so much of himself. He never promised them a straight line to success. He promised them the truth. You will fail, he'd tell them, looking them straight in the eye. And after that, you'll probably fail again. But if you refuse to quit, if you just keep getting back up, you will eventually win. He didn't inspire them with empty words. He inspired them with proof. His own life was the evidence. One quiet night, Rohan found himself alone. He decided to revisit the place where he had almost given up all those years ago, the small room with the rain-soaked roof, the rejection letter that once felt like a death sentence. He stood there and smiled. Not because the memory of the pain was gone, but because it no longer had any power over him. Failure had been the hammer that shaped him, and he had survived its blows. You see, this story isn't really about success. It's about refusal. The refusal to let failure define your identity. The refusal to stop when quitting feels like the most comfortable, logical thing to do. It's about the refusal to believe that your past owns your future. So if your life feels delayed right now, if all your hard work feels completely unseen, if every failure feels deeply personal, like it's a judgment on who you are, I want you to remember this. You are not finished. You are not behind. You are becoming.